Most people, when they think about what's going to accelerate people's careers, they think about the big stuff, the visible things, like the big presentation that goes really well, or the project that gets noticed, or the conversation with a senior leader that opens a door, or the promotion that tells you that, ooh, you've arrived. And those things are real. I'm not dismissing those. But what I've observed working with professionals at every stage of their careers is that the people who rise consistently, not just one time, not just in one favorable set of circumstances, but repeatedly across different roles and different organizations and different challenges, they're almost never the ones who got the luckiest with the big moments. They're the ones whose daily habits quietly built something that the big moments couldn't have built on their own. Think about it this way: two professionals, same talent level, same ambition, similar opportunities. 5 years in, one of them is being fast tracked, and the other one is still waiting for their moment. And if you look at any single week of either person's working life, you probably can't explain the gap. The difference isn't really visible any one day. It's visible in a pattern of days, in the accumulated impression that certain habits, repeated consistently, create over time. Behavioral science has a name for this. It's the compound effect. Small actions, repeated consistently, produce outcomes that are wildly disproportionate to the size of any individual action. The same mechanism that makes compound interest so powerful in finance makes daily habits so powerful in careers. Your career isn't built in one defining moment. It's built in those patterns that people experience from you repeatedly over time. And that is genuinely good news because patterns are something that you can shape starting right now. So that's what this episode is about. Let me start with the pattern that makes this episode necessary because understanding why talented people plateau is the key to understanding what the habits that we're about to discuss actually do. Here's what I see pretty consistently. Ambitious professionals invest heavily in the things that got them noticed in the first place: their technical expertise, their hard work, their delivering results. And those investments, of course, were right. They worked. They created the track record that established credibility and opened those doors. But at a certain point, the game shifts without telling you it's going to shift. Nobody sends you a memo. The skills that built that early success stop being differentiators because everyone at that level has those skills. And what starts to matter more, what leadership is actually evaluating, often without explicitly articulating it, is a different set of actions, of behaviors, of signals that you send. They're not really looking at what you can do when everything goes well, but how you operate when things don't go well. Not just whether you deliver, but how you think, how you sustain yourself, how you grow, how other people experience working alongside of you day after day. And the professionals who plateau are almost never lacking in talent or ambition. What they're missing is the intentionality about the daily habits that build those more subtle signals. They're operating reactively. They're showing up to each day just as it comes, responding to what lands in front of them, waiting for the next big opportunity rather than building the foundation that makes opportunities sustainable. I've worked with genuinely exceptional professionals who were frustrated, legitimately frustrated, by slower advancement than they felt that they fairly deserved, that their talent deserved. And when we looked closely at what was going on and we looked at those daily patterns of theirs, we almost always found that there wasn't any dramatic weakness. It was just a collection of small habit gaps. Operating narrowly, staying inside their functional lane, not managing their energy, hesitating where decisiveness was needed, leaving their reputation to form all by itself rather than intentionally shaping it. And none of these gaps stop anyone in any single moment, but they accumulate over months and years, and then they shape a perception. And perception at the career level, well, that shapes everything. So here's the insight for you to think about. High potential creates opportunity. Hidden habits determine whether you sustain that opportunity and whether those doors keep opening. So, the 5 habits that we're about to walk through are ones that I have seen make the most consistent difference. Not maybe the most talked about habits, but the ones that quietly separate the professionals who keep rising from the ones who rise once and then level off. Before we get into those habits, I want to share a piece of research that I find remarkably instructive because it shows something about career acceleration that most people wouldn't even predict. In the early 2000s, researchers studied a large cohort of junior lawyers at major law firms, and they were trying to understand what would predict who made partner. The intuitive candidates seemed obvious: billable hours, case performance, technical legal skill, client feedback, all of those things were certainly measured. But the researchers went on and they also tracked something that was less obvious: the learning behaviors of each junior associate. Specifically, how actively they sought feedback, how deliberately they reflected on their own development, how broadly they engaged with the firm beyond their immediate assignments, and how quickly they adapted their approach when something wasn't working. And the results to those questions, those were the real standout. The learning behaviors, not the performance metrics, they were among the strongest predictors of who made partner a decade later. The highest performers on the technical metrics in year one weren't reliably the ones who reached the senior levels, but the ones who demonstrated consistent learning agility, who treated every experience as data and actively sought to understand what they didn't know and who adapted faster. Those are the ones whose trajectories kept rising. So, what this tells us is something so important about what careers actually reward over time. Early on, the game is about what you can do. Later, the game is about how fast you can grow, how quickly you can develop new capabilities, absorb new contexts, operate effectively in territory that you haven't navigated before. And the people who win that game, they are not the ones who are the most talented at the starting line. They're the ones who made learning itself a daily habit. Which brings us directly to where we're going here. 5 habits, practical, specific, and I want to be direct here, not the ones that most people are focused on, which is exactly why they have the impact that they do. Habit number 1 is preparation. I'm starting here because I think preparation is the most universally underestimated professional signal, and it's the one with the most immediate return on your investment. Here's what I mean. When you walk into a room prepared, you've done the thinking, you've anticipated the questions, you've clarified the outcome that you're here to drive, something happens beyond just performing well. You send a signal. You send a signal that you communicate well before you even said a word, that you take this seriously, that you thought about it before you arrived, that you respect the time and the attention of the people in the room. And that signal of preparation, that's one of the fastest trust builders that there is because it becomes so visible and because it's consistent. The person who's always prepared becomes associated in people's minds with a quality of professionalism that makes them feel safe. And safety in a professional environment, that's the foundation of trust. Research on perceived competence and leadership presence is consistent on this. Preparedness improves not just your performance in any given moment, but how capable you're perceived to be, independent of the actual content of what you say. People who appear prepared are experienced by other people as more authoritative, more reliable, more leadership ready. The practical version of this is really simple. Before any significant meeting or conversation, just take 10 minutes. Ask yourself 3 questions. First, what is the purpose of this interaction? What do I want to contribute? Secondly, and third, what am I likely to be asked? And to that, what's my honest answer? 10 minutes. The signal that you create with that, it is disproportionate to that little 10-minute investment. Preparation, it's not just a performance habit, it is an identity signal. It says, this is someone who takes things seriously. And that identity, repeated consistently over time, that is going to shape your reputation absolutely for the better. The second habit is professional curiosity. This is the habit that I think is most underappreciated. And it's the one that I've seen reliably separate the professionals who keep growing from the ones who plateau. Let's draw this distinction really carefully here. There's a difference between being good at your job and being curious about the world that your job sits inside. Most ambitious professionals are excellent at the first one, but far fewer have developed the habit of that second one. Professional curiosity is the consistent practice of asking why, not just how, not just how do I complete this task, but why does this task exist? What business problem does this solve? How does our function connect to the broader strategy? What are the pressures that the organization is navigating that I'm not directly responsible for, but I should understand because what I'm doing sits within that and exists for that, because of that and for that. Korn Ferry did research on executive success, one of the most rigorous long-term studies of leadership career trajectories. And it identifies learning agility as one of the single strongest predictors of reaching senior levels. Not intelligence, not early performance, learning agility, the ability to extract insight from experience, to apply learning from one context to another context, and to stay genuinely curious and adaptable as the environment shifts, which of course the environment is shifting all the time. So they're staying genuinely curious and adaptable. Learning agility is not something you either have or you don't. It is a practice. It is built by consistently choosing to engage with things that are outside of your immediate lane, by reading beyond your function, by asking a senior leader, what are you most focused on right now? And what makes you focused on that? When you notice, when you don't understand something, and treating that as an invitation rather than an inconvenience, it makes a huge difference. So here's the phrase that I use with clients. Comfort keeps you competent, but curiosity is what helps you rise. The professionals who just stay comfy and cozy, who master their current role and stop there, well, they're going to be excellent at that role. But the ones who stay curious, they're going to keep expanding what they're capable of. And expanding capability, well, that's what advancement requires. The third habit is reputation stewardship. And this is the habit that I find people have never explicitly thought about. And the one that once they start thinking about it, well, it immediately changes what they do, how they operate. Every professional has a reputation. You have a reputation. I have a reputation. That's not a choice. The choice is whether you're shaping it intentionally or whether you're leaving it to just do the job on its own. Your reputation is what happens in your absence. It's what people say when you're not in the room. When they think, when your name comes up, I mean, what are they thinking? Well, what they feel when someone asks, do you know this person? What do they like to work with? And it's built not by any single moment, not by the big win or the impressive presentation. It's built by the consistent pattern of how you're going to show up day after day in the ordinary interactions that don't seem significant all by themselves. I had a client, and Trina was talented, she was driven, people thought highly of her on her immediate team. And she came to me because she felt like her career had stalled, even though she had great performance reviews. So we took a look and we did something that I do with a lot of my clients. We tried to articulate what her reputation actually was, not what she wanted it to be, but what it actually was. What were people experiencing from her consistently that was forming their impression? And we were able to gather some data, and what started emerging was that her reputation was excellent, but cautious. People trusted her work completely, but they also experienced her as someone who hesitated. who she asked for confirmation before moving forward. She was thorough to the point of slowness, excellent but cautious. That single insight changed how she operated, not because she fundamentally changed who she was, but she became intentional about closing the gap between the reputation she had and the one that she wanted. She started making recommendations more decisively. She started volunteering her perspective rather than waiting to be asked. She started managing what other people were experiencing from her rather than just leaving it to chance. Reputation stewardship, it's the habit of asking regularly, what are people learning about me from how I show up? And then deciding deliberately what you want that answer to be. Your reputation, that is your professional echo, and you get to shape what that echo is. The fourth habit is decisiveness. And this is the habit that surprises most people when I name it, because it's not about being bold and aggressive or certain. It's about something much more specific and much more subtle. It's about reducing friction. So, what I mean is that in any professional environment, there's a constant flow of decisions that need to be made, directions that need to be set, ambiguities that need to be resolved. And the people who rise consistently are disproportionately the ones who help that flow move. They take available information, they make a call, and they move things forward, rather than the people who create bottlenecks by waiting for more certainty before they're going to commit. Research on leadership perception is consistent on this. Decisiveness, the willingness to make thoughtful calls with imperfect information, that is one of the strongest drivers of how leadership ready someone appears. Not because being decisive means being right. You're going to sometimes be wrong, but because the ability to create clarity and ambiguity, to take a position and to move forward, well, that tells something very fundamental about how you're going to operate when the stakes are higher and the uncertainty is greater. The trap that so many talented professionals fall into is what I'd call perfection analysis, the desire to have all that information, complete information, to have considered every single angle, to be fully certain before committing. And in some contexts, high stakes, irreversible decisions, that caution, that's exactly right. But if you apply it broadly across the board, it creates a pattern that reads as hesitation, as someone who needs to be pushed, as someone who adds deliberation where what's really needed is momentum, is moving forward. So, yes, you have to make the distinction. Is this one of the ones that has to be, I have to wait until I have all the proper information? But more often than not, that's not what you're facing. More often than not, you've got to move forward. The shift I work on with clients here is really specific: to start practicing making recommendations, not just presenting information, but offering a view. When someone asks what you think, tell them. When you've analyzed a situation, conclude something from the analysis. When there's ambiguity in the room, offer a frame rather than waiting for someone else to do it. You're going to be wrong sometimes, and you have to learn that that's okay. Being wrong and recovering well is itself a leadership signal. What's not fine at the level of senior leadership is not being willing to take a position at all. Indecision does not read as careful. It reads as lacking the confidence to lead. And that perception is just going to erode the trust that advancement requires. The fifth habit is energy management. And I want to close this one because it seems like it's the most undervalued habit in professional development, and the one that most high performers are actively getting wrong. And again, I have a distinction between high performer and high performer who's a rising leader. So someone who's not a rising leader, they are performing well, but like very well, but they're getting this wrong. The pattern that I see constantly in ambitious and driven professionals is that they treat their career as a sprint: maximum output, maximum hours, maximum effort, because they believe not unreasonably, that working harder and longer will compound into faster advancement. And for a period, yes, it often does. The earlier career rewards intensity. The extra hours, they're going to show up in the deliverables, and the hustle is visible and it gets noticed. It's just that at a certain point, and this point comes earlier than most people expect, the returns start to flip. Chronic overextension starts to cost more than it produces. Your decision quality is going to start to degrade. Your creative thinking can start to narrow, and your emotional regulation, it can start to become harder. Just those capabilities that leadership is evaluating, the clarity of judgment, the steadiness under pressure, the quality of your presence, those are the first casualties of depletion. And the professional who's running on empty, they're often the last one to see it because they're too tired to even notice. McKinsey's done research on leadership performance and performance psychology research more broadly. They are increasingly clear on this. Sustainable high performance requires recovery as a deliberate practice, not a reward for finishing. The leaders who sustain their effectiveness over long careers, they're not the ones who push hardest in any given period. They're the ones who manage their energy, and they do it with that same intentionality that they manage their time. The metaphor that I find most useful here is that burnout is ambition without architecture. It's wanting to build something significant without constructing a foundation that can hold that weight. And the professionals who flame out early, who had extraordinary promise and somehow lost momentum along the way, they're almost never the ones who lacked the drive. They're the ones who had plenty of drive and just no structure for sustaining it. Energy management, is not a soft topic. It's a performance discipline. Protecting your sleep, protecting your focus and your recovery, these are not concessions to limitation. They are the conditions of the quality of thinking and presence that leadership requires. You can't build an extraordinary career on chronic depletion. The architecture has to be sustainable, and what you're building, if not, what you're building won't hold. I want to share one more piece of research. And like the best research, it comes from a completely unexpected place and lands somewhere directly relevant. In the 1990s, exercise physiologist Per Olaf Astrand was studying elite runners, trying to understand what separated the highest performers from the people who were just talented, but they were inconsistent performers. The training programs were similar. The talent levels were comparable. So, what was the variable? And what they found was completely counterintuitive. The highest performers were not the ones who trained the hardest. They were the ones who recovered most effectively. They were the ones who alternated periods of high intensity effort with deliberate, protected periods of recovery. And they treated recovery as seriously as the training. They did not treat it as downtime. They did not treat it as a gap in productivity. They treated recovery as an active, very essential component of performance. The athletes who trained hard without structured recovery didn't just burn out, their actual performance capacity declined. That stress without recovery, it created degradation rather than growth. Whereas the ones who built recovery into the architecture of their training, they kept just getting better. The parallel to professional performance is almost exact. Work is the training. Recovery, sleep, focused protection, genuine disconnection, like checking out and doing it deliberately at times. That's the period where growth actually consolidates. When you push without recovery, you're not building capacity, you're eroding capacity. So, the reason this research matters for career acceleration specifically is that energy management is not about doing less. It's about doing the right things with enough capacity to do them well. A decision made with full cognitive presence is better than 3 decisions made exhausted. A conversation that you have with genuine attention and clarity is more career building than 5 conversations that you have when you're distracted and you're depleted. The professionals who sustain their rise over a long career, they're the ones who figured this out, usually because they had to after burning out once. The ones who rise fastest are the ones who figure it out before that happens. So, I want to zoom out for a moment and look at how these 5 habits work together because individually, each one of them matters, but the real power is how they reinforce each other. Preparation improves your reputation because the person who's consistently prepared is experienced over time as someone who takes things seriously. That reputation opens doors that raw talent just doesn't open. Professional curiosity expands your capability because the person who keeps learning keeps growing. And when you keep growing, that means you keep having more to offer as the demands of the role increase. Curiosity is how you stay ahead of the curve instead of just trying to catch up to it. Reputation stewardship amplifies everything else because even if your habits are excellent, if you're not intentional about what impression those habits are creating, then you may be leaving perception to chance. Stewardship means connecting the dots between how you operate and what people believe about you. Decisiveness creates trust because the person who helps work move forward, who takes positions, who reduces ambiguity, they're experienced as someone safe to give more responsibility to. And trust, as we've talked about across multiple episodes, is what creates the conditions for advancement. And then there's energy management. That sustains all of it because none of the other 4 habits are available to you in the way that they need to be if you're operating from all that depletion. Preparation requires focused attention. Curiosity requires mental openness. Reputation management requires self-awareness. Decisiveness requires confidence. And all of these capacities are among the first things to go when you're running on empty. So these habits don't just coexist together, they build on each other. And together, when you practice them consistently, they create what I think of as the invisible architecture of a career that keeps rising. You won't see it in any single week, but you'll see it looking back in the trajectory. So the professionals who rise fastest, they're rarely dramatically different from the ones who don't. They're not operating with some secret advantage, some extraordinary talent, some access that other people don't have. In most cases, the gap is smaller and more specific than that. They're more intentional. They're more intentional on a daily basis. They prepare for the meeting instead of catching up during it. They stay curious about the world beyond their immediate function. They think about what their reputation is actually communicating, and they make choices that align with what they want it to say. They make calls with imperfect information rather than waiting for certainty that may never come. And they manage their energy, and they do it with enough care that they can sustain the quality of presence and judgment that leadership requires, not just for a quarter, but for a career. None of those habits are going to make the headlines. None of them are going to get applause in the moment, but they sure compound. And what they compound into over time is a professional reputation that makes people want to bet on you and then keep betting on you as the stakes get higher. Your career isn't built in the breakthroughs. It is built in the patterns, and the patterns are available to you to shape, starting with how you show up tomorrow morning. So here's your question for this week. Which of these 5 habits is currently your strongest? And which one do you think is limiting your rise, even subtly? Don't even think about the one that you want to work on. Think about the one that, if you're honest, that's your gap. The one that people who work with you closely would probably name it if you asked them. Find that habit and commit to one specific concrete change this week. Not a transformation, a change. One behavior practiced differently starting now. Because the leaders who rise fastest, they're not dramatically different. They're simply more intentional daily. And intentional starts now.